may look like day right now, but it's currently 5 a.m. at night. I'm being lit only by the near full moon, and they're shooting with the A7S. So right now I'm set up outside of Angkor Wat Temple. This is the most famous temple in the Angkor Wat complex. So we were the first ones on the scene here at about 4:20 a.m. It's now 5:20 a.m. and it's quickly starting to fill up. So for this whole time during this whole filming process for this tutorial, we have always arrived on scene very early, and I've told you that's because we don't want to miss the light and we also want to have time to set up. In this particular situation, we had to get here so early that we woke up at 3:30 a.m. to make sure that we were here just after 4. I've shot here many times, and every time I've been here, by the time the sun comes up, there are hundreds of people clamoring to the front of the line to try to get the reflection shot. So sometimes, especially with Angkor Wat Temple and shots that are this iconic, you have to arrive 3 hours early just to make sure you can get the shot. Behind me right now, this might look like a big lake, but right now it's kind of dried up into a little puddle. We're in February, so we're kind of far into the dry season, so this is starting to shrivel up here. In the wet season, it's actually quite better here. There's more areas to set up because this pond actually swells a little bit with the rain. There are 2 reasons why I'm set up right next to the pond here. One is I want to be able to lower my camera a little bit to stretch out the reflection, and 2, I want to make sure that nobody can get in front of me and block the shot. So if I set up a little bit further away in a more comfortable and less muddy area, I can't guarantee that somebody won't get in front of me and ruin my shot. So this way, right up against the water, the only way somebody can get in front of me is if they just actually climb into the water. This is an interesting shot because it's a very iconic silhouette shot. And that means that the sun is going to rise behind the element, so it's going to be severely backlit to the point where it's going to be very difficult to expose for the foreground. So this is one of those shots where I like to manage how much of the foreground element, in this case the temples, that we can see. The final goal with this shot is to have a nice silhouette with about 25% of the detail coming through. So we're not going to totally crush the blacks, we're just going to make it seem like it's almost a silhouette. That way we get the best of both worlds, a little bit of detail in the foreground and all the color in the background. The reason this is a very iconic sunrise position as opposed to a sunset position is because the sun rises behind the temple. That means we have an excellent chance of getting a powerful and colorful sky from the effects of the sun. At the sunset, the sun actually sets over there, so it would cast golden light on the temple, but you never really get clouds or colors because the sun doesn't rise and cast those colors, so it's a completely different shot. It looks okay at sunset, but sunrise is where it's truly spectacular. As you guys can see with all the lights flashing around here, this spot is starting to fill up quickly, and these are people with flashlights trying to get ready to find their spot for sunrise. So what I'm gonna do is get all of my camera stuff ready, shoot through this, protect my position, and try to get the shot. I've been standing here for a couple hours and the sun is just about to rise behind the Angkor Wat Temple. About an hour ago, the sky was just lighting up with these beautiful red colors, and it hasn't stopped yet. Even now, just before the sun's about to come up, there's still a massive amount of color in the sky. So we got really lucky with this shot. I've shot this maybe a dozen times, and this is probably the nicest sky I've ever seen. Now, when you're shooting iconic sunrise locations or just sunrises in general, it's always a matter of luck. You never know what you're gonna get. So the first time that I came here, for example, I spent 5 mornings to get the shot that I really wanted. This time, first try, we got everything exactly like we wanted. When I first set up here, I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. So I set up my camera, turned the f-stop all the way down to the lowest setting it had. In this case, it was 3.2 with the zoom that I had, and I was just taking test shots. So I took test shots so that I could see what was in the sky behind me and start composing my shot before the light started going nice. Now, once it started looking nice, it was still too dark for a normal exposure, so I actually turned to bulb mode, turned everything back to f8, turned the ISO down to the low 200, and started doing timed 2-minute exposures so I could pull all that color out in the sky. Once the sky got a little bit more light, I was able to put my camera back into the normal mode and just shoot. And in this case, I shot bracketing just in case I need an underexposure. As the sky starts to get a little brighter, sometimes I need to shoot a -1 just in case. Now remember, in the post here, I'm gonna balance this as a silhouette. So it's gonna be a partial silhouette, and I'm gonna use all that color and texture and beautiful detail in the sky. All these people here right now are waiting for the sunrise. A lot of them arrived only minutes ago, but the truth is the best light happened an hour ago. So always remember that. Get there early. Make sure you're there for the progression of all the light in the sky. So when they say sunrise spot and you're a photographer, they really mean an hour before sunrise shot if you really want that sky to be nice. You probably also noticed that I'm standing in some really nasty mud, so I made sure to wear the right shoes and prepare for the right conditions here. To the left and right of me, a lot of people have taken their shoes off and waded out in the water a little bit to get a closer shot. It's really interesting because this is one of the most iconic shots in the world, so it definitely belongs in a photographer's portfolio, but it also explains just how busy this actually is. And the funny thing is, we're actually starting to enter into the off season, so this is not as busy as I've actually seen it. But right now, there are people surrounding the whole perimeter of the water waiting for the sun to come up. So if I didn't get here early enough, I'd have a situation where it'd be really hard to find the place to get the good shot. Right now I'm actually getting light rays. The sun is actually projecting light through parts of the clouds and we're getting light rays through the clouds. It's exceptionally beautiful. This is probably the longest lasting sunrise that I've seen for quite some time. This morning was the best case scenario. Beautiful light, perfect positioning, and even getting up at 3:30 a.m. still feels like the best decision I've ever made. I'm really looking forward to getting these into Photoshop so we can see just what kind of colors we can pull out of that sky. Welcome back to the post-processing studio for Angkor Wat Temple sunrise. From the video, you guys know that this is a mega busy place, so obviously there's going to be a lot of object removal, and when I mean objects, I really mean tons and tons and tons of tourists. So that's definitely going to be a challenge. For this, what I want to do though, again, it's simpler than what we've been doing before, what we've been doing in Italy, but it does bring up some interesting possibilities to really tweak the colors and get the sunrise exactly how we wanted it. So this was an amazing sunrise, I have to admit. It was one of the best ones I've ever seen. In the beginning, it was nice. When it was dark out, I had this beautiful red in the sky, and I thought that was going to be the peak of it, but it started to transform. I started to get light rays behind Angkor Wat, shooting through the clouds, different colors and everything like that. But it is Cambodia, and there are a lot of fires that are burnt for different kinds of cooking around here, so it's always a hazy environment. So I'm going to try to cut through that haze a little bit. We're going to accentuate the colors, and of course, we are going to remove tons of people. So let's begin. We're going to be working with a single RAW file, and the single RAW file is shot again with the Fuji X-T1. So it's done a very good job. They do a great job with color. So first thing that I want to do is just go ahead and balance the highlights and the shadows. So first thing I want to do is just go ahead and adjust the highlights a little bit. I'm going to bring this back about up to 50, and you see the before and after is really not much. Our sky is pretty much fully intact. Now, this area here that looks dull, the reason it looks dull is not because of the highlights being blown out, it's actually just because of the haze and the light from behind hitting that haze. Next thing that I have to do is adjust the shadows. Here's where the magic actually happens, because we could take this all the way to 100 and it looks bad, obviously, but you can see that that's a silhouette. It's always going to be a silhouette. We just have to figure out how much of a silhouette we want. And this is the most important step. And the most important step for this is just basically saying, do I want it to, have this much of an imprint on the scene, or do I want it to be less? And for me, I think something right around 20 here is going to look better than it did before. It's going to give us all the detail. Now, there is not much detail back there, but we can start to see and resolve the palm trees, the stupas here that are very beautiful. Scaffolding's gone finally, which is great for this shot. It's a perfect time to visit Cambodia. Got the palm trees, the reflection, and of course, tons of people. But we'll take care of that in a minute. Now let's address some of the dullness to the sky. We haven't done this a lot yet, but what we're actually going to do is work to change our white balance. So what I want to do is get more vibrance and color out of the sky, and I can do that. Right now it's set to as shot, but I can do that by just simply adjusting the Kelvin temperature. So if I start to move it up just a little bit, you can see if I go up too much, you can see it's going to start to make it really hot. But I'm looking for something neutral. It was about 46, so I basically want it to be maybe 47.6, 47.5. Now as I start to move that up, I also want to change the tint. And as I move the tint around, you can see to the left, everything gets a little bit more green. Up here, it starts to go into the magenta color. So it was very neutral before, and what I'm going to do is just kind of pull this up and pull a little bit more, just a hair more magenta into the scene. And that's pretty good. That's already just given me a nice base to work with to be able to manipulate inside of Photoshop further. But I'm going to do a little bit more. Under color balance, we actually have a three-way color toning system. So we're able to create custom effects and custom colors inside of here. And it allows us to lock it into the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. So what I'm actually going to do is change the highlights a little bit, and I'm going to pull the highlights towards red just a little bit. You can see that that is now making the sky a little bit pink. But once I do that, you can see those little lines moving to the right here? I can actually change this, change the position, and change this and change the position. So you don't have to just click out here in space. But what I'm actually doing is just changing this a little bit, just to pull a little bit more of the red up. And what I'm also going to do is just pull, you can see I actually have the darkness here, the highlights of the highlights. So it's basically changing the tonality. So I can create a custom sort of color set here, which is really nice. So if I pull it back to the beginning, and I've just been kind of showing you guys, I only want that to be a slight adjustment towards that color. And now I can also change the midtones a little bit because it's not all just the red. So for the midtones, I'm going to do a little bit something a little bit different. Most of the highlights are coming from this part of the temple. Make one quick adjustment before I move on. Are coming from this part of the temple behind it. But a lot of the highlights outside of here are actually midtones. So what if I want to change the color here? I want this to be more blue. What I could do is pull the midtones more towards a blue color. And you can see by doing that, I can just change it just a little bit and just give it a little bit more personality without going in to Photoshop, which is really nice. We can go ahead and change this. Maybe we change this 100 more. We give this 48 instead, so it warms it up a little bit more. And we cool it down just a hair more, just like that. And now we have a nice base to work with. I'll go ahead and export this as a variant into Photoshop. Oh, here we go. We'll call this Adjusted Raw. And just so we can keep things consistent, oops, I opened Lightroom. Let's go ahead and let that do that in the background. So I can keep things consistent. What I'm actually going to do is reset this. So we'll go ahead and reset this to shot. And I will also reset everything down to here. And we'll go ahead and export this one more time as a variant. Select all, copy, we'll paste it in here, and basically what I want to do is create our original raw. Perfect. All right, so that's looking pretty good so far. We've basically just done a basic adjustment, but it already looks pretty good. Let's just go ahead and hit save, because the next thing that I'm going to do is going to get a little bit complicated. So while it's saving, let's go ahead and zoom in. And let's see what we find back here. And let's see how many people are actually here. Well, there are a lot of people. People. And a ton of people right in the foreground. So what I really wanted to do here was something that I did in landscape photography and post-processing at the Church of the Good Shepherd. If you guys did see it, I took multiple exposures together and I used the Photoshop statistics tool, brought all of those layers in, and let Photoshop decide what was moving, what was static, and get rid of everything. But I shot for around 20 minutes, and these people in the foreground never moved. They stayed there the whole entire time. In fact, after I ran about 10 files through statistics, it made it worse. So in this case, I actually have to go in and manually remove these people. But there is hope here. Check out all that detail in the background. Can you see how minimal that detail is? Chances are I don't have to work very hard. I'm also going to show you guys, if I zoom way in here, that is actually Patrick Hall in the background. So remember in the interview when I was way far away across the river, the little lake, that was him shooting me. I'm just curious if this was before and after he dropped his 70 to 200 and broke it. But I'm pretty sure this was before that happened. So what we're going to do here I'm going to remove all these people. And I've shown you guys this technique before. And I'm just going to refresh you guys. I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp. And I'm going to use a light flow around 20%. And if I wanted to remove Patrick, I'd basically just go ahead and start, removing him. And I find myself removing Patrick a lot, and Lee, from these images. But for now, that's basically what I'm going to do. The thing is, there are so many things to remove here, it's going to take a little bit of time. So let's have some fun. We've already done this a bunch of times. We've removed some really obnoxious objects in Rome, like that tractor thing that we did in the forum. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. Nothing's more difficult, and it should only take me about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the editors speed this up, and we're going to see if we can get a clock time of how long this actually takes me. I'm going to try to do it as fast as I can and keep it under 10 minutes. And if we take a look here, that is a massive before and after. You can see just all these people, all of them back there, they just disappear. The other thing that's interesting too, look at the reflections. I had to remove the reflections of the people. So if you're going to remove all these people, don't forget about the reflections. And even now I'm still going in and seeing, well, you know what, that's not a person, but that's a weird little sign. Probably says do not enter or do not do something, or it's just a little bit of scaffolding. Any of these little things, just go ahead and get rid of them. And it's pretty easy. Then you can go from this to this. I'm going to go ahead and name this object, OBJ, removal. You could name it people wearing tourist clothing, removal too. I'll just be nice. We'll call this blend. I'm going to create a new layer, Shift, Option, Command, E. Reason being, I'm going to hit save real quick. The reason being that I created that new layer is we are going to use Color Effects Pro real quick just to pop some of these details out and make our jobs a little bit easier. Let's go up to Filter, Nick Collection, Color Effects Pro. Maximize this here. Let's start with a Pro Contrast. The reason being, I'm just going to use a little bit of dynamic contrast, and you'll see as I use a little bit of dynamic contrast, that's just going to pop those details back a little bit. As I said, this whole thing is a little bit flat, so I'm just trying to add a little bit more dynamic contrast. We'll be doing some other things, but I want to do a few things here first. Let's contrast the color range. If you remember with this one, we just have to zero everything out here. We'll zero that out first. Give this one just a little shake so it's normal. And with the color contrast, we'll just add a little bit of color contrast. You notice that's actually going to get rid of the color, but it's going to intensify the sky. I really like the way that it's intensifying the sky. That's nice. May want to add a second one for the water, but we'll go ahead and address that later. I just want to pop those values out a little bit. Remember that using a polarization filter is just going to change the colors. So you can see it's going to bring those colors back into a nice vibrancy. Oh, something like that. We'll go ahead and apply it. And there we go. That looks pretty good. So we've gone from the base layer, now we've added a little bit of extra contrast and punch to this image. Now we can take it a step further on our own. Before we do that, let's go ahead and delete this layer just so we can clean it up and make sure there's no extra stuff that's making the file size any bigger. Here's what I want to do with this image. Spent a lot of time getting rid of the people, getting rid of all of that little, well, just all the random stuff in the background, really. Patrick was the most fun to remove, I have to admit. But what I want to do is I want to add intensity to the sky. I want to add heat to the sky. I want to accentuate the blues. And I'm going to do that using a very simple method of luminosity masking. But I call it channel masking, actually. Basically, the terms luminosity masking, lumimats, channel masking, clamping, clipping, all these things, they all apply to this technique that we've been using for many years. It's only lately that photographers have used the term luminosity masking to sort of create a new, it's not even a new technique, it's just a way to unify it into a tool set. But these are all things that I've been doing since Photoshop version 5.5. Channels haven't changed that much, and they give us tremendous amount of power. So here, just like we look at in a lot of files, if we look at the green layer, the blue layer, you can see that a blue layer is really flat because there's a little bit of blue. But if I look at the red layer, look how much red there is. And that should be a no-brainer because we know the edges of the clouds are red. So if I'm just going to select the red channel, we know that we can isolate those reds much easier. So if I just load this red channel, go to the layers here, and I'm just going to create a folder, and I'm just going to call this reds. And even inside of this folder, I'm just going to select the mask, Alt, select, and I'm just going to clamp it just a little bit, just a little tiny bit, so we're not really doing much to the temple itself. And we'll just go ahead and change the vibrancy a little bit. That looks pretty good. I also want to just go ahead and address something right now. In the bottom of the image, you can see that much brighter here, less bright here, so I'm just going to make a selection here. I'm going to pop out some of that in the bottom too, just so I have more of a global selection here. So what I've done is I've created a channel just for the reds. Now inside of the reds, I can go ahead and create some curves layers. First thing that I want to do, I want to add some heat to the sky. So I'm going to do that by, instead of just shifting RGB, I'm going to pull the red over. And if I pull the red over, you can see we add red to the sky. We add green, green to red actually will make orange. So you can see now I'm going to be able to make orange to the sky. It's actually interesting too. We can remove blue if we really wanted to remove the blue, and you can see that that's going to create even more yellow. So depending on the tone that we want to create, we can start to clamp or compress the blue value just to lose it a little bit altogether. Go back into the greens and the reds, and we can custom make this red heat that we want behind the temple. And just with varying degrees of red and green together, you can see that we can create a before and after. We have something that's a little bit more vibrant and a little bit more intense behind the sky. But here's the thing. I have managed to clip some of the values in the red, so I have to be really careful not to clip those values. I'm going to go into the RGB. I'm going to compensate a little bit just by pulling all the values up. And what I'm going to do is pull the highlights up pull the highlights a little bit, and also pull the shadows a little bit just to intensify it. Here's the thing. I only want this to be included in this part of the image, right behind the temple itself. It's already isolated a little bit, but I want it here and I want it here. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a gradient here, and I'm just going to go ahead and have it fade from here to here. So you can see now I just get it, whoops, and you can see that's what I had selected last time. We have to change the gradient tool back. It's always good to reset your tools. Linear gradient, we'll say from here to here. And now I just have that behind the sky. As a side effect, you can see that I'm also getting it on the water, because that's exactly what I want. On the water, it's already part of the white selection. So I'm just going to basically get this exactly how I want until it's exactly where I want it to be. Let me just change this back to normal. We'll go ahead and intensify that. So we have this nice, intense background effect on the water, and we also have the mirrored effect on the water itself. So it's starting to look really good. But right now you can see that the intensity here is pretty good, but here it's not so great. So actually what I want to do, I'm going to duplicate this curves by doing Command J, and I'm actually going to lock it down so it's just the water. So we basically have, let's do here to here, and I'm just going to draw another marquee selection right around here. I'm going to look at this mask here, because basically what I want to do is just lock it to this bottom portion. So I'm just going to go ahead and select this mask. With this marquee selection, I can move it exactly where I want. I'm going to go up to select and feather it a little bit. I'm going to feather it by, actually 12 pixels is perfect, and I'm going to just go ahead and black it out. So now I have this other curves layer that's only affecting this bottom part. Inside of this curves layer, I just want to go ahead and match this intensity, and I can do that just in the RGB channel, very easily match that intensity. And if it's a little bit too red, a little bit too orange, I can just go ahead and pull this down a little bit and just kind of match that intensity. So now we basically have this really nice hot sky happening now behind here. Second thing that I want to do is I want to address what's going on in the blue channel. Specifically, I want this to be a nice vivid blue. I feel it's too sandy, too washed out. It's a very Southeast Asia look to the sky. So I want more contrast, more blue, more dynamic color. Let's go back into the channels here. Now I could probably, well, see, no, I couldn't even invert the red. I'm going to have to go right to the blue channel here. And it may be not very contrasty, but that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and select it, go back to the layers, add a new folder, and we're going to call this blues. Inside of the blues, we'll go ahead and clamp this a little bit, which is fine. So we'll just go ahead and pull these values down. Reason being, it's going to knock these clouds out, and then you can see as I start to pull these values up here, we're going to isolate a little bit more. So it's just isolating. And this is going to be most of the sky, but not these clouds, or not 100% of those clouds. Inside of the blue, I'm going to create another curves layer. Well, let's address this. This looks really good. It's warm, but when you add too much warmth to the sky, you also get the warmth in the blue, and it just neutralizes that beautiful blue color. So let's go ahead and clamp the blues a little bit. If I start to clamp the blues, you can see I'm going to start to get the purity of those blues back. Well, that's starting to look really nice. Now, something that you can do if you start to also add red to blue, you're going to get a purple. If you remove it, you're going to get a cleaner blue. So you notice how we went from a vibrant blue to a clean blue? I'm trying to create a very clean blue here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and create a little bit more. I'll also go into the RGB and basically pull the values up a little bit, make it a little bit brighter and a little bit more contrasty in those blue tones. We'll take a look at before and after here. That's starting to look pretty good. It's destroying some of what I've built here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a mask so that it just occurs here in the water and it just occurs here in the sky. So to do that, what I'm going to do is create a mask here. It's going to be a double faded mask, and it works really well. So just select the mask tool here, and what I'm going to do is switch the palette so that it's going to be not present anywhere I draw, and I'm actually just going to hold shift. So basically right in the center of Angkor Wat, all the way to the top to about here, you can see now I get this mask. So it blacks out that whole area that I've managed to protect, and then just adds it in the top of the frame here. So just in the top. Now I don't think I could have done a better job with that one, so I can either draw a new mask, or I can look at this mask here. I'm just going to zoom out, and I can go ahead and scale it. So if I want that to be a little bit more intense, more of that to be knocked out, I can go ahead and scale it just like that. Pretty easy. Let's go back into the blues here. Now we have the blues, we have blue in the sky, we have red on the horizon, and that's starting to look pretty good. Now it's just a matter of tweaking it a little bit more. So how much blue do we want in the sky? Do we want a little bit more intensity of the blue? That could look pretty good. Remember, adding intensity of the blue, what I showed you guys in the reds. If I pull the red out, pull it up, I get pink. If I pull it down, I get clean blue. So here's how I get a clean blue in the sky. This may seem a little complicated. I'm literally mixing color using curves. But there's only 3 channels, RGB, they all add up to white. So if you add equal parts of each, you get white. So it's never really destructive, it's additive color, so it's nice. And if you're not sure, there's only 3 colors to actually work with, just slide them a little bit and you can see what colors are added when you add them together, what colors you get. It's simple color theory and simple color palettes. Also think back to your old days in kindergarten when you were finger painting. It's very similar to that. It's actually a fun way to just mix color. So that's looking pretty good so far. I love the way that we've gone from this to the vibrance of this. We were adding some really nice color. At this point, let's just go ahead and let's crank those reds a little bit more. I really want to go ahead and pull those out more. Nice. Those reds are awesome. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and pull the blues a little bit more here. So let's just go ahead and add, I'll go back to the blue channel here. And I'll just pull this up just a little bit more. Just add more blue, beautiful blue. Now it's time to go ahead and unify this together. I'm going to unify this together by adding contrast in the midtones. The first thing that I'm going to do though is notice our histogram first. Go back to RGB. We're actually missing a little bit. If I add a curves layer here, you can see that I don't actually have anything touching white. So what I'm going to do is just clamp this a little bit, just so that everything touches white a little bit. I'm just going to start to barely blow out these highlights so they look intense. I'm going to go back into the channels, and what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to leave everything intact. Or actually, you have 2 options here. If you want to create a mid-tone mask, what I usually do is I start with the base. You don't usually want to do a mid-tone mask on the corrections, but if you do, it's going to take away some of these extreme highlights. But as a rule, I try to just do it to the base. I go into the channels, everything will reflect. Create another mid-tone mask by creating one for the highlights. We'll duplicate it, invert it, select all, subtract it by holding Command-Alt, subtract the highlights as well, live with the error, and create a new curves layer here. And that's just going to be for the midtones. So now we have everything together here that we've created, and now we have a way to go ahead and adjust just the midtones, which is really going to add this extra contrast. And here's a good example where I don't really want to do too much of the highlights. I want to protect the highlights. a little bit. I may want to bump the midtones in the midtones, which is kind of funny, and pull the shadows down just to get more vibrance and more intensity. Histogram's looking really good. Everything's looking really good so far. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and create our high pass filter for this. I'm not going to use any plugins to sharpen. We're just going to create another filter for high pass just to pop some of these edges out. But we may cause some problems here. So this is a good example of really knowing when and when not to push detail. Here's why. Let me go ahead and zoom in. Check this out. There's not much detail back there at all. It's mostly a silhouette, and that's a problem. And the reason is we do not want anything here to look more noisy. And right now, since it's sort of gray, this doesn't do much to it. All it does is pop the edges, which we also don't want. So this is a good case when you don't need to sharpen an image. So it's a good chance to just delete the high pass and not worry about it whatsoever. You can also see in here that I do have some artifacting in the sky. There were a lot of birds. So the step that I didn't do that I should have done before was to get rid of these guys up here, which is not that big of a deal. If you want to, you can go in and remove them yourself. But if you are going to remove them, I suggest doing it before you start doing all of these channel selections. So that was my mistake this time, but we've done it so many times, should be pretty routine just using the spot healing brush. So let's go ahead and back this up a little bit. Well, the last thing that I want to do, you can see that I do have a little bit of noise in the sky. So I can't sharpen this using a high pass filter. So what I want to do is I want to accentuate the sharpness of the architecture by accentuating the softness of the sky. So we're going to do that in a really simple way. We'll take this color effects layer. I'm going to go to filter, Nick collection, and I'm going to use define. All right, by default it looks pretty good, but I'm going to take it a step further and use the manual profile. I'll draw my own selection, reanalyze, and it should be even more intense. Perfect. You guys can see if I can slide this. It's kind of hard to tell, but as I slide it, you can see all that detail kind of soften out, which is great. I'll say OK. Perfect. We'll leave define off for now. What I'm going to do is go to the channels, and I'm going to take a look at what I have here. Well, that one looks as a good base. Actually, what I want to do is just have a selection for the sky. Let's duplicate the red channel. Let's bring up curves again, and let's see what we can do here. Let's just go ahead and just clamp it like crazy. That looks pretty good. Actually, that's awesome. That's exactly what I wanted. I'll leave it like that. I'll go ahead and brush this in. So we'll just go ahead and quickly brush this in here. I know that I want the water to be soft, so I'll go ahead and brush that in as well. I don't want the architecture to be too soft, but again, there's not much detail there whatsoever, so a little bit of spill into those spires is not going to hurt at all. I'll go ahead and select this, turn everything back on here, and then in the layers for define, I'll go ahead and apply the mask. Oh, it looks good. So now we basically, if we zoom in here, we should have a softer image throughout. It's going to get rid of some of the details, but it's also going to get rid of all of the noise. And since we've compressed it down to just being the sky, we won't lose any detail in our foreground or our spires, but we'll get a nice, beautiful sky that should be really easy to get this ready for print and have it look really nice. So we'll just call this noise reduction. And that's about it for this file. Let's take a look at where we've come from here. So this is our final result with softening in the sky and everything. Let's take a look at our original raw. So you can see we've actually come a long way. Now what's really cool about this is I love looking at stuff like this because we had something that was already really beautiful, just not very vibrant, but I knew all the potential was there to take it from this to this. Nothing was really time consuming, no complex blending. The only thing that took a little bit of time, obviously, was arriving from here to here, which was getting rid of all those people, but all the detail was, pretty flat. It was easy. I didn't have to work too hard. I just followed edges as usual. We've done some more complex stuff together already, so this should have been a good refresher and a fun way to just get rid of everybody without having to worry about crucial lines and edges. After that, we had color effects, and I'll go ahead and put the softening there too. And you can see that that was just for contrast, but after that's where the magic really happened with our color corrections that just popped all the vibrance and all the detail and took us from here to here. Oh, it looks pretty good. And I'm just going to go ahead and actually turn all these on because these all turned off. Let's do that one more time, actually. Took us from here to here, which is a really beautiful, vibrant, dynamic sunrise. One of the nicest sunrises I've ever seen in Angkor Wat. That wraps it up for this lesson. Again, it was a little bit simpler. We didn't have to combine multiple exposures. We had one great exposure. We had to remove a lot of people, but we were really able to push colors that were already there to the next level and come away with something very, very beautiful.